You're listening to Around Comics. 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 Comics.
You are listening to Around Comics episode 456. Under the Influence with Tim Seeley talking Cherry Pop Tart. One. I'm Brian Salazar. With me as always is Christopher Niesman and Tom Peter, and our very special guest, the hardest working man in all of comics, Mr. Tim Seeley. How are you, sir?
Glad to be here. Always a pleasure to talk to you. It's very nice, and it's a lovely night. It's a beautiful night in Chicago. It's one of the loveliest nights of the year so far. So it's great. It's great to be able to. I've already had my drinks. We went out to the cocktail place by the house, and we had a couple already. So
somebody's already under the influence.
Yeah.
That's right. Hey, it's good to see you, man. It's been like easily over a year.
Is it really? Jesus, fuck. I don't know, man. Everything goes so goddamn quickly now. I have no goddamn idea.
I think you were one of our COVID guests. I think.
Well, I just had COVID, so I'm your COVID guest again. I just had which was a blast. Thanks everybody. That was fucking fun.
Yeah. How was C2E2? You know, we didn't. I don't think any of the three of us made it down there this year, and it had kind of like fully formed into a pop culture con, you know, like pre-COVID. What was it like this year?
I mean, I feel like, well, from my viewpoint, the pop culture is gone, and it's an Artist Alley convention. It is the best. It is the best con I do all year financially. It's the best con I do.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, not even close. Part of it is I can go when I sell out of books. I can go back to my house and grab them.
Yeah.
But it was crazy. The Artist Alley is like the biggest draw. There was no publishers there. There was, there's celebrities like Chris Evans was there and shit. But it is the level of which that show has become, like very comic focused. If you're someone like me, is crazy to me.
Ooh, that makes me want to go next year.
Yeah, it was a blast. And there was just one 8 fucking months ago, so I was a little concerned that because of the COVID shit and the way that it's spaced out, that people would sort of not show up, but they showed up, and I used to always be able to do the thing because I've been to so many goddamn conventions in the past 20 years. Like I can kind of gauge when a recession is coming, and there isn't one coming.
Well, that's good to know. You heard it here first, folks. The financial expert, Mr. Tim Seeley, is claiming there is no.
You can tell.
I love that we live in a world where Artist Alley commissions can be a bellwether for economic forecasts.
I mean, I knew in 2008 shit was going down. I remember I was like 31 years old or something, and I was like, oh fuck, this isn't good. And every little like sort of problem we've had since I had a bad con, and this one I was like, are you guys serious? Are you really want to spend that money? Are you want to buy that page for $900? Okay.
Yeah,
it was one of those. So it was great.
That's outstanding. Well, hey, this is called Under the Influence, and if you are new to this format of the show, it is when we get to make a wonderful excuse to have an old friend on the show to talk about a comic that influenced them. That could be the first comic they bought. It could be a comic that was, just purely influential in a way that maybe wanted to make them create comics or change the way that they read comics or enjoyed the medium. And Tim, I would like to say he did not surprise us.
Well, I could have. Amazing Spider-Man 230 again. I've talked about it a million fucking times. The first time I ever got. But I felt like, everybody who works in comics currently who's over 30 is like their first comic was Spider-Man comic. That's the way it is. Right. So I don't want to do that.
There's going to be a lot of Spider-Man, Batman in
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Or like fucking Frank Miller Daredevil or something. So I don't want to do that.
Get it?
Yeah.
Pfeiffer. That was Pfeiffer's.
Right, of course. Right. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to, you know, well, and also because I have Money Shot coming out and because it's so much based on the experience I had with indie comics with an X when I was in my teens, I felt like it was pretty important to talk about it.
Yeah. So what is your comic, Tim?
Well, so I actually picked Cherry Comics 10. That was the first issue I got. But it's also fair to do issue 1. This is
Cherry Pop Tart.
Cherry Pop Tart. When it was Cherry Pop Tart, obviously they had to change the name. Larry changed the name because he got in trouble with Kellogg.
Yeah.
Sued by Kellogg for
Kellogg's is like, yeah, we appreciate what you're doing, but we need you to take the name off of the front of that.
So her name technically is Cherry Pop Star. As of in this issue anyway, she is Cherry Pop Star. But hugely influential on myself personally, obviously. And you know, look, I love superhero comics and I love all that sort of other stuff, but I feel like, you know, I'm sort of agnostic about superheroes in a way that I like comics. I like superheroes because I like comics. I don't like comics because I like superheroes.
Okay.
So for me, it's more. I think it's more important to talk about some of this other stuff.
You have not only written but drawn a lot of superhero comics.
Yes, I mean, I work in comics. Like Western comics. I mean, again, I'm not, you know, but I feel like every day that it goes on for me becomes more like, God, I really got to make sure people know that it's not just fucking superheroes. Because I teach at a college and those kids love comics and they don't give a shit about superheroes. So, you know, I feel like more and more every day we have to like be pushing towards the fact that, hey, look, in the Western model, we don't just do superheroes. We have other stuff, you know.
Can you give us a little bit of I have to be 100% on. I never even heard of this comic before. I never read adult comics really. I mean, here and there I've come across them, but it wasn't anything that I ever really invested much time in. So can you give us any history on, you know, this was created by Larry Wells. Anything about him or how this comic came about or why, or, you know, what was sort of the history of Cherry Pop Tart or Cherry as a comic book character?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an absolute expert in the history personally, but out of the end of the '60s comes the sort of comics revolution, which was a bunch of people who'd grown up on animation and comics from the '40s and '50s, and then they were really influenced by that sort of thing. And in about 1960 something, they start this sort of movement: Zap Comics, Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, all that sort of. Comics, and they start calling it comics with an X.
Crumb,
right?
A lot of it's California. It's Hateberry Ash.
Right. It comes up with at the same time the counterculture movement, right? So, so these kind of comics were available as distributed through head shops, right? You go and buy your stuff to work.
The artists and writers were high while making these comics.
Tobacco pipe.
And so it was really part of that counterculture movement. And so as part of that sort of movement, a big thing that they were doing was that they were doing comics that were sort of unrestricted in the content. So it was like, you know, like let your id run. And so you had stuff that was, you know, anti-religion. You had stuff that was subversive, anti-war, all that kind of stuff. And then you also had like Crumb and some of these other guys doing strips, which by the standards of now would be considered brutally misogynist. And part of that would, in their defense, would be, well, I'm just admitting what's in my head, which may be valid, but some of them came across pretty sexist. And so sort of a guy who comes out of that as a cartoonist is Larry Wells. And sort of toward the end of the 70s and the early 80s, he kind of takes that aesthetic and he borrows the sort of the Archie style, you know, the kind of the cartoon style made famous by like Stan Goldberg and Dan DeCarlo.
Yeah, it's very DeCarlo.
There is, he takes the American sort of high school Archie kind of aesthetic, and he puts it through this underground comics filter. And so Cherry is this sort of like end of the 70s, beginning in the 80s. Someone, she's like a free spirit. She's the sort of like a female Archie, and she's kind of a bimbo like Archie, who is also a bimbo. She's sort of sexually, free, and so it sort of makes fun of this, the 50s aesthetic, but that happens to hit at the beginning of the 80s when we're going back to this sort of consumerist,
sexually repressive.
We're back in the 80s, and so Cherry kind of takes on its own life then as well, where Larry is kind of able to do subversive comics about the 80s as well. So
the 80s were the first decade to romanticize the 50s.
Right. And so they kind of went back socially, and it becomes more consumerist, and we get Reagan and we get all this shit. And so Larry's doing comics through Last Gasp and stuff with Cherry, that he kind of happens upon something that is genius at the time, which is by making fun of the 50s, he's making fun of the 80s. And so, Cherry it's an Archie pastiche, sort of. And Cherry is essentially she's a high school student. She's, notoriously open-minded, but also it introduces sort of these other things. And it's at its best, I think the thing about Cherry that really stuck with me, and I think stuck with a lot of readers, is how subversive it could be. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it would do the things that something like Crumb would do, but it would do it like, if it was being sexist, it was doing it to make fun of those attitudes more so than the ones that were just like, this is what's coming out of my head. I like to cry, jump on the back of a woman.
It was more pointed.
Yeah.
It was like more, like a specific thing, as opposed to just like, here's just like this is just me vomiting out, whatever,
which has its place, and I think comics are that. But so, Cherry, it wasn't monthly. At first it was sort of quarterly, but sort of around like 1987, 1988 is when I first ran into issues. I would find them in my hometown. There was a comic shop, and it was solid, but they didn't carry adult comics. But there was a pawn shop down the street.
Is this in Wausau?
Yeah, the guy he sort of inexplicably had a distribution count that wasn't Diamond. It was like whatever sort of other. This is before everything was kind of capitalized by so it wasn't Capital City, and it wasn't any other one.
Some weird one.
Yeah, and he had a distributed account, so he would get like Malibu Comics, Aircel, like just like the sort of black and white Boom comics. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, hidden among those books would be Cherry. And so, I would go. My mom and dad were cool about shit. They would like take me to the comic store, and then I would pick up my shit. And on the way back, they'd be like, "Hey, do you want to stop at that pawn shop on Grand Avenue?"
Hilarious.
I was in there, and I could grab. And so I was getting like, aristocratic extraterrestrial thieves, and I was getting like, X Mutants, and I was getting
radioactive hamsters.
I was getting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
Black and white. All that sort of shit. And then every once in a great while, there'd be a Cherry in there. And credit to my parents, they were sort of just like, I don't know, whatever. I was like 11, I think, when I got this one. This is the actual issue I got.
Jesus.
When I got number 10. It's 11 or
12. So basically, Cherry Comics number 10 gave you the talk.
Well, like, yeah, I come from a.
This is a penis. This is a vagina.
Well, I come from I probably grew up a little bit weird. My parents were very proactively open-minded and liberal very early. So I was I was aware of things, like not in a creepy way.
You weren't shocked by this.
No, I also knew about. So my dad was a collector of occasional comics. He would get Vampirella. He would get that. So I was aware of other kinds of comics, and so he at one point, I remember, bought Black Kiss by Howard Chaykin.
Okay.
and I wasn't supposed to read that. Obviously, I shouldn't have read that. That was one I shouldn't have read. Cherry's fine. Black Kiss, not so much.
That was one of the few that I did read. Yeah.
Right. Well, I snuck that one at age 11, and I was like, I should have done that. That was because it wasn't really the sex that got me; it was the violence. It was so violent in that, So, but the Cherry thing I think was influential because of how subversive it was, and it was a parody. And to this day, I think, I mean, it's not just Cherry, but that idea of subversion and parody, and I make fun of everything I do. I think comes a lot from reading those comics early, and finding. Even later that got me into like they were doing reprints of Zap comics and some of that kind of famous furry freak brothers and shit. And when I could find those, I would always grab them.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pretty funny fake ads. And like mixed in amongst like the Archie style, like short individual stories that are like 3 pages long, and then here's one that's 8 pages long, and then in between here's an ad for this or that. So it has
that very 80s indie, black and white indie comic that Love and Rockets would do that. They would have it's a 3-page story, and then odd things, and then a 10-page story. So
I'm gonna say, and this is a compliment, it's very grubby. It's like in the best way possible, as far as just it's a very grubby comic, like that black and white, like very like obviously put together from like one person's brain. Like this is all from this person. Like they made everything inside of it. They laid it out. Like this is the work of this dude.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah,
and I agree. And one of the things I always really liked about that comics were the only place to get something like that. There was no other media that could just be like, here's just some guy making this entire thing, and there's no one telling him what to do. And like later, 2 or 3 years later, when Image Comics was announced, I was already sort of primed for that stuff because I was reading those black and white books. I had got a copy of Omaha the Cat Dancer when I was 12, and I had gotten a copy of American Flag at that time. And the sort of pure id that those comics were. There you go. Yeah.
A page by page dissection of Omaha the Cat Dancer.
Omaha the Cat Dancer is so much less dirty than Cherry. So much.
Oh, yeah.
Not even. It's like Omaha the Cat Dancer has occasional sex. The sex is always plot driven. Always. Cherry is just like, here's a blowjob for no fucking reason for free food.
Yeah.
Over and over and over. It's like every other panel. Vampire.
We got bored with this bit we're doing.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the blowjob part.
Yeah, Wendy Whitebread. I did not read it. I believe was that Don Simpson. I'm not sure. I'm familiar with the title. I haven't read it. Again, like I was limited at the time to what this guy with the
head shop.
That what he would get, and it was kind of hit or miss. So I remember I got 10 of Cherry, and then later I think I found like 13 or 14. And then the next time I found it, I think it was in 1995, and it was like on issue 17 or 18 or something. So like it was like
and it moved several publishers. It was at Kitchen Sink for a little while. Is Kitchen Sink still around?
Yeah, kind of. I think it's all those kind of they do trades and stuff occasionally. But
it's whenever they put something out. Kind of
yeah.
Were you able to catch up on the continuity of those
all the crossovers?
Well, to be fair, there's been a lot. Apparently, there's been a lot of reprints that stories had to be stripped out of the reprints because of litigation and that kind of stuff.
Well, so I remember, and then when I started going to like 1993, 1994, I started going to comic conventions on my own because I was like 16, 17 years old, and so I would drive down to Chicago, or I would from Wisconsin, or I would go to Madison. I remember I went a couple times. And then I was able to start hunting for back issues, and I was able to catch up on a lot of these books, and that was kind of part of the appeal of being able to go to a convention was that I was able to find these
things that you couldn't find in Wausau.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So Cherry was a big part of that, and then also just the Omaha Cat Dancer. I have a whole run of that, and that kind of stuff, which was and like in the '90s in comics, that was the stuff you would be able to find in the bins, or in the back issue. Doing a search, you can find that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, sometimes you had to go up and ask them.
Listen,
Yeah.
It was maybe under the counter.
No, you know what?
Where's your
Hilariously, it wasn't. I very remember buying that shit. It would be like,
and this is why the CBLDF was born.
Right? Sable 12 and 13. Oh, and there's Cherry number 9. Like, it was just no one fucking gave a shit. It would be all like $1, and it wouldn't matter,
Yeah, and kind of seriously, this is why the CBLDF was born.
I mean, famously, I remember I was 11 years old and I bought the entire run of Watchmen except for 2, which I had to later search. No one asked me anything. I'm like an 11-year-old kid, and I'm like, I'll take these books and plop down Watchmen.
got any good rape comics you want to sell me as a
There's only a little
12-year-old?
bit of nudity in there, and
There was
Rape.
subject matter. But what I liked about Cherry was, and what I still like about it, is that it was sex positive, which I would say it also about Omaha Cat Dancer. A lot of that stuff in that era was creepy sex stuff.
yeah,
A lot of the comics with the X are pretty misogynist.
Cherry is very empowered.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, Cherry is in control of everything.
She is the main character. She's kind of a bimbo, but she's also clearly like got a plan.
Always in control.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Larry, as a cartoonist, worked with a bunch of other cartoonists to make that book. A lot of them were, co-plotted with his wife. Neil Gaiman wrote a book, a story for that. Von Bodie did stuff for Cherry. So there was a lot of cool. The first Von Bodie thing I ever saw besides Wizards was in Cherry.
Really?
Because he did. In fact, I think it's in issue 10. He does a backup strip.
Okay.
So like there was cool shit in there, and there was, there was references to, the other sort of major books of that era. Famously, I think, Larry was kind of outside of that sort of San Francisco crew of cartoonists. I think he was based out of Roswell, New Mexico for a long time, and he wasn't really like, hanging out with those other hippies. But
that's kind of that weird time in comics where it was, starting to break away from the New York bullpens, and there were starting to be comic book publishers all over the country, and people were able to create comics outside of New York City. Right?
Yeah, and it was a big part of it too was the distribution at the time, because there was a bunch of, like, before the whole capital city thing that happened in the '90s, there was a bunch of distributors, and they handled different publishers to different degrees. And so Marvel and DC had their own distribution sides, but then there was little companies that would just sort of pop up, and they would.
It's kind of like alcohol distribution. There are some distributors that will handle some breweries and not others, and some wineries or buyers. Yeah, it was this total mishmash of distribution.
Yeah. And it could be kind of local, like you would have sort of a Midwest distribution company that would get stuff, and so it could be kind of spotty, but it also meant, like, again, like the fact that there was just this guy with a pawn shop with an account meant, like, I was getting shit that I should not have been able to get in my town, and got that guy. I don't know how much I made on those books. Maybe it was me and 3 other people buying those books, and that's why he didn't turn down a fucking 11-year-old kid.
I love that your influential comics came from a fucking pawn shop in Wausau, Wisconsin.
I mean,
that is why we do this.
I mean, I would still get my, my X-Men and my event from, 29 Super on the Highway 29 in Weston, but, or I would go to the Wausau News Agency, which was an incredible old-fashioned newsstand in downtown Wausau, Wisconsin, that had every DC Marvel book, every continuity book. It was fucking incredible, but it didn't have, so.
in Green Bay, there was a newspaper place that had that's where you would get your weird comics. Because it was like totally, it was like the people that ran it, like, because they did not care, meant that just weird stuff would show up. It wasn't like they were like, which of these, comics are we getting? Like, I guess we'll get these ones. Like, they just didn't like pay attention to it.
It was grab bag.
So like
they're grab bags.
So it was like, so there was always like weird magazines and like weird music magazines from other countries, and just like this weird collection of stuff that you could get there.
Was it called Book World? Because I think it was it called Book World? I remember going, Green Bay was the thing, my parents would take us once a year. We would go to Green Bay, we would hit Power Comics, and we would hit Toys R Us. It was like a big deal because we didn't have anything.
Yeah.
A comic shop like that. We didn't have fucking Red Lobster. We didn't have Toys R Us. So go to Green Bay, and I remember going to that newsagent place.
It was called Bosses. It had like a cigar area in it. It was just like
I know it. We went one fucking time. It was like one of those. My parents dropped us off and gave us each $10. And then they went out to eat at Red Lobster, which was like a big deal. And then they came back, and my brothers and I were like, "Here's a weird stack of shit we bought. Here's like Sunrunners and fucking whatever like we would get, like weird indie stuff." And yeah, it was awesome.
It's like we bought it at this place. There's like a bunch of old guys talking about like cigars up front, and then just like
super smoky. It was kind of stinky.
Yeah.
I bet you if I could dig back some of that shit that I had, it would smell like old ass cigar.
I was gonna say there's old book smell. Is this like old book plus old cigar smell?
Yeah. Like pipe tobacco and leather, and then like
I was telling my students about this, where it was like, when I was a kid and you went to a comic book shop, it was kind of a shit show. Like, it was a crapshoot. You might end up in one of those stores that was like secretly really just a front for like a pot seller or something. And so you would have like a pizza box on the comics, and like it would be just kind of crappy and everything would be beat up. But you'd be like, you wouldn't care because it was all you had. And you'd be like, I found a bunch of Marvel UK books. There's Death's Head 9 under this.
And the thing was, you didn't care about condition. You just wanted to find them so you could finish reading the fucking story.
Or it was stuff that you had heard about. Like, I remember there would be ads for like Marvel UK books, or like, or Judge Dredd. I remember like finding 2000 AD in 1985 or 86.
If the cover was ripped off, you didn't care.
You didn't fucking care. Or like, Action Force, which was the British G.I. Joe, all that sort of stuff. Like, you knew it existed because you would ads, or you had heard about it. And if you found it at a comic store, sometimes it was a good comic store that looked like Chris's office, or it was a fucking dump, and it was like some guy, like with a breathing mask, that he was like taking a breath every night so he didn't die, and then like, and it was just
that one's in Oak Park. That's in Oak Park, Illinois.
Yep, that's it's the closest shop to my house.
Yeah. Or Variety Comics used to be on Western Avenue.
I remember
that guy.
That guy.
He was selling weed there, for sure.
I remember like in the 80s when the big boom of comics, speculation happened. Like there was like 4 comic book shops popped up in, within a couple of miles of my house. And it was like, I would go to all of them because each one carried different stuff. And there was like the one that was there forever. There was 2 that were there for a long time. And then there was like 3 that just kind of like were there for a while. And you could tell like the guy was selling like, baseball cards and old records and, like all sorts of shit and comics. But it was awesome, like you said, because it was like, you never knew what you might find. And, I think like, I remember finding, what was that indie comic? Tim Vigil. What was it? What was it?
Faust.
Yes, Faust. Yes. And I remember finding that one day when I was like 12 or something, in one of these shops, just like, what is this? This is insanity. This is so violent and crazy. And
I mean, that was one. So that was the other side of this. My brother and I got really into this shit when we were about 13, 14, 15. And and partly inspired by like finding this stuff like Cherry and all this sort of shit. And we found this dude who would distribute out of his house in Ohio. He would send you individual comics. And it was called Raw Comics. That was the name of the company.
Oh,
And
God.
he had this. It was just like a typed up list of shit he had, and you would get on a mailing list. And he didn't give a fuck. I was fucking 12, 13 years old.
It was the fucking 80s.
You know,
Welcome to the 1980s.
Tim's in,
Mailing you a list of like dirty comics.
Tim's are in porn comics and like ninja stars. And,
Nunchucks.
Yeah.
Dude, I wasn't gonna waste money on Ninja Stars if I could get a copy of fucking Faust. Like there was no way I would on anything but fucking comics. We would do that. We would go through, we go to Raw Comics and order. I remember getting Scimitar from Aircel, which is
oh wow.
Faust, Cry for Dawn, which was Joe Linzer before he did Dawn. All the Boneyard Press books. So that was like Bill the Bull and all that sort of shit. We would order that stuff, all of it. We would go mow lawns, and my brother and I would order all it.
This explains so much about you and your brother now. Like all the things that I've been, over the years.
It's like mailing you guys.
Everything's falling into place.
I mean, it also, again, adult content is kind of weird shit. But for me, comics weren't just superheroes from a very young age. And it was, like we would get Vampirella, we would get, horror comics and science fiction stuff. So it was an access to stuff that was outside the sort of what comics in the late 80s and early 90s were dominated by, which was superhero stuff. So that's probably in part like when I started doing my own stuff, like I was rolling into doing horror comics and fantasy shit like right away. Because, as much as I enjoy my Avengers books, like, we were so excited to have stuff like, Poison Elves by Drew Hayes and all this stuff to me, which was like, that's how you do fucking indie comics. The Tick, I remember it was like hard to get the Tick, but it was a goddamn treat when we would order. My dad used to read my copies of the Tick. I would order from Raw Comics, get my copies of the Tick, and I'd share it with my dad. It was like, it was just like, there was a plethora of stuff. You had to be a very specific kind of person to find it. That was kind of the deal.
Yeah, it wasn't at the checkout at the grocery store.
No. Yeah.
Going back to, the Cherry comic, when you're 11 and reading it, were you aware that it was a takeoff of like Archie and stuff? And then, like how aware were you of the sort of satire in it and sort of the, the send ups of, and the, social sort of like social commentary that it had? Was that something that came later, or was it something that you kind of were able to grasp even then?
Well, I mean, I always joke about this. I was also a huge Mad magazine fan when I was a kid, and like Mad would do like Edward Meese, and I didn't know what the fuck.
Yeah.
Contra, you know what I mean? Like, so I would read those comics and just pretend like I fucking got the joke,
Sure.
like,
or like movie parodies of movies you'd never seen. Like
Yeah.
I was talking about this the other day with my friends, where it's like, I remember there was a Mad magazine where they did a parody of the movie The Deep, and they called it The Dip. And I've never seen that movie, but
Oh, you enjoyed the strip.
right.
Yeah.
Totally. And I mean, I think and a lot of the Cherry stuff was like it was out of my, at the time, like out of my range of experience, but I did understand the Archie stuff. My mom was a big Archie reader when she was a kid. So when I was like, I don't know, 9 years old, we went to my grandma's house and cleared out my mom's closet from when she was a kid, and there was all these Archie books in it. So I had Pep Comics, Archie, Betty, Veronica, and all that stuff, and I loved it. To me, it was comics. I didn't know, I didn't know that Archie was supposed to be not cool when you were fucking 10 years old or whatever. I had no idea. I just knew it was comics, and it was kind of funny, and that was fine for me. So I understood, and they were old Archie. They were also like Archie from like 1968, 69. So
Right.
I definitely understood that it was a parody of Archie, and I understood the parody.
You had a visual guidepost.
Yeah.
Before you read Cherry.
But there's plenty of stuff in there. When I started working on this Money Shot thing, I went back and read Cherry 10. I was like, oh, yeah. there's all kinds of shit in there that I see it now.
Oh,
Well, and maybe that leads into how this comic influenced you, because that's kind of the gist of it. And you mentioned Money Shot, and if folks haven't picked it up, do so. Money Shot, showing that for the at home video folks. Maybe specifically, how did Cherry influence your work on Money Shot?
Well, so there's a thing I noticed very early as a kid, which was that if you did sex, you were already being, you were already outside the system, right? Like that meant that you were an outsider because, I mean, especially in 80s Reagan stuff, and it was very conservative, and so like you were already doing a sort of undercurrent. You were a rebel no matter what you did, but you could just do sex, or you could do what Cherry did, which was like, hey, as long as I've got you. And as long as you're a weirdo and you're reading this comic about teenager fucking people, I would like to point out to you, here's an hypocrisy about religion, and here's an hypocrisy about schools, and here's an hypocrisy about politicians. And so there's this thing that goes together with carrying a lot of sort of 80s satirical stuff, which was you could be as base about your sort of joke as you wanted. And you had a certain audience, but you could also slip in some smart shit in there. And I think that's what Money Shot was going to always be, which was yes, it's about scientists fucking for to pay for science and have sex with aliens. Yes, a lot of the jokes are dick and titty jokes, but also it's about something, right? I mean, it's about this sort of fear of education because we make people too smart; they won't listen to our shitty opinions, and so like part of that has always been baked into it. And I thought it was funny when we announced that Cherry was in Money Shot. They put up an article on Bleeding Cool, and one of the comments was like, "I don't know if this cartoonist who does Money Shot is aware how subversive Cherry is, but I won't keep my hopes up." It's like, you fucking shit, babe. Book and then come back and tell me about how I can't handle subversion, you fucking weirdo. But it is such a
hopefully it understands, gets it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like I mean, okay, brother, I'm just doing the book where the billionaires come to the planet and the scientists had to like go and fund their own shit by fucking aliens. Yeah, that's not subversive at all. But it's the sort of sense that like if you were already going to be doing something that was you weren't going to be on the shelf, you were going to be on the top shelf anyway, you might as well say what the fuck you want, right? Sure. Which I think the thing I took from Cherry very, very early, and probably from Omaha as well, because, it wasn't just about a naked cat chick at all. It wasn't even close to just about that. It was about relationships and the sort of things that we place on our partners, and it was about emotional baggage, and it was about Minneapolis, which was great. It was it's like all these things that people don't know that would be contained in something because you look at it and you say, it's got tits, it must be stupid. So that's what I took, I think, from that sort of stuff, and which is I think a primary motivator for me to do anything to this day.
I wonder, thinking about, because I did go back and I read a couple of the earlier issues of Cherry Pop Tart as well, and I feel like they were much more along the lines of the other sort of comics with an X work stuff. It was not as pointed or poignant, or it was especially the first couple of issues, and then it seems to evolve a bit as it goes on. And I wonder, like, thinking about it now, I don't think that anything happens in a vacuum, and especially art doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I thinking about it now, I'm wondering if like part of that was to get away with being able to do because at the same time, if you think about it, like a lot of things are going on in the country with for whatever reason it popped in my head, like Hustler magazine and and those laws, sought suits about pornography and what's pornography, what is art, and that was very prevalent in the 80s. We kind of lived through that, and those court cases and arguments and all that those things going on. Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if some of that evolution is in a way like going, well, wait a minute, it's not just pornography. It isn't mindless. It is art because there is a point to it. There is something else going on there, as opposed to sort of like early on when some of this stuff was. And I think you see that in a lot of like comics work where it's like early on, it's very misogynistic. It's very just, pornographic and sex for sex, almost, like Tijuana Bible-ish in a sense. And then it starts to change. And I wonder if that's a conscious decision on the artists, the creators, in a way, or if it's subconscious, like sort of a reaction to, hey, wait a minute, we can still get away with this stuff. We want to be subversive, but we don't want to be shut down.
I think I also wonder if it's like getting bored.
Well, it's also drugs. I mean, it's like when when a lot of these cartoonists sort of enter this subculture, Crumb's a great example of this. They sort of get into the subculture and they're doing these sort of indie comics, and then they start smoking weed or doing mushrooms. And in part, that also, it doesn't always make them better cartoonists, not always, but it definitely expands some minds. Like, I think a big part of that was Crumb. I mean, if you ever look at Crumb pre-acid and Crumb post-acid, there's a change, like there's a difference in the way that he sees things and the way that he renders. I can't say that for sure for Larry, but definitely I think you're right. Part of it is exactly maybe what I'm referring to is you're already doing something on the top shelf. You're already doing something for an audience who is a counterculture audience, who's already, if you're the kind of person who like walks into a bookstore in a major American city and picks up, not just a fucking copy of Swank, you pick up, Cherry, your audience is already pretty primed for something else.
Yeah.
I think that might have been part of it too, is they're changing with their audience. And certainly that was a big part of the comics movement, was they got more and more tied with the counterculture movement. They're reacting to the counterculture stuff, then they become a part of the counterculture, and then they influence the counterculture, right? Like that's, the sort of the process for, I mean, especially, S. Clay Wilson or any of those cartoonists who are become iconic, right? And the Cherry is interesting because it comes out after that stuff. Like it's not a 60s comic. It's made by a 60s sort of dude, but it comes out in the 80s, which is
early 80s.
Yeah, early 80s.
Well, part of it too, I wonder if it's just like also just like finding your own creative voice. And like at first all you can do is like get out this version of this thing that you want to do. And then as you get better or more confident in what your vision is, you can make it more like, actually I have this to say, because now it doesn't feel so overwhelming to like just get this thing into existence. And now it's like, oh, okay, like I could do that.
Like you said, just boredom too. Like, oh, okay, how many
I did
blowjobs?
that.
How interesting is like another blowjob joke or another? You know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe.
Imagine the first time you put it out, you're like, oh, that's great. Like I did that, and then maybe you're like, oh, okay, well, I did that already. Like, start thinking, like,
what else can I do?
Yeah. I mean, and part of it probably to some degree with something like Cherry was that. It's also a satire of like pop culture stuff of the time. So every cover would be like, here's Cherry as, a pirate, or Cherry as a, and it would become sort of these like, Cherry was a character who could like transcend space and time if necessary. And I think part of it too is like, as he starts doing these strips that the constraints are just out the window, it kind of opens him up to, telling these different kinds of stories. He was doing stuff about Silicon Valley, like in the 80s. I mean, the character LED, who, LED, haha, she was like on the internet in 1989. I remember picking that shit up and, just sort of not necessarily understanding jokes about, Woz and fucking, but Larry knew that stuff. Larry came from that kind of background.
Yeah. Have you ever met him?
I have. He wouldn't remember it. I bought a bunch of art from him at twice. I bought art from him, once at a con in New Mexico and once at a con in New York, maybe but so when I wanted to do this book, he and I have a mutual friend, and that's who I asked, dude, Stephen Frank, who does a bunch of like card series and stuff for Larry. So I asked Stephen if I could use Cherry, and it was just like, I was like, he'll never let me fucking do this.
Yeah.
And then he said, yeah, sure. And I was like, okay. Well, then I sent him the first script, and I was like, is that okay? And he's like, yeah, great. Like, oh, really? And I was like, okay, here's the other one. but it's also like, I think I was picking up on stuff that I knew Larry would be interested in. The stories about billionaires and AI, and the sort of lack of respect for people who make things, but sort of fealty to the things they make. And so, a guy like Mark Zuckerberg not really caring about what he makes up, but being obsessed with Tolkien is always kind of fascinating to me. And so this is kind of what the story is about, which is something that Cherry is about also. So
That's got to be exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't believe people let me do the shit they let me do. That is always and I always feel like I have to pay it forward. So like, people ask me if they can use casting, I'm like, yeah, go ahead, because Cherry let me use Cherry and LED, and and I can't believe any of the shit that people let me get away with. So
Well, I mean, speaking of crossover characters, which Cherry is now kind of in a long list of crossover characters that you've worked with, especially in Hack Slash. What are some of the funnest other properties that you've been able to work with in your own stuff?
I mean, I still think it's a coup that like the third issue of Hack Slash, we got Chucky. I can't believe that. To this day, I can't believe we fucking pulled that off. And and they let us do it, and they thought it was totally okay. So okay. But I mean, I'm still always doing dumb shit like this. I'm always like in Local Man. We have a story coming up. Well, I don't know if I'm supposed to let it out, but I'll tease it because it's fun. But we're doing a story where we brought in a bunch of other Image characters, and so Boof from the Bruise Crew is in Local Man. So I mean, you remember Boof? He was like a McFarlane created caveman character. We put him in Local Man. But I love all that shit. Like I just did a Hack Slash book for the Image 30th anniversary where we put in Super Patriot from Savage Dragon and Shadowhawk and Cabot from Bloodstrike.
Nice.
And just people they just let me fucking do it, and then no one said shit. So
it's like people respect you, Tim. What the hell? What's going on here?
I don't know if it's that, but I think I think I have my reputation, at least now, is like, Seeley's such a nerd for this shit. He won't fuck it up.
They trust you. They trust you that you're going to.
You're competent. You're competent.
I won't break your toy. Like I don't break toys. I respect toys. I have a bunch behind me. You can tell.
Yeah.
Well, but I don't break your toy. Like I will give it back to you the way that you gave it to me. That's how I'll do it.
I think I might know the answer to this, but what's your favorite property that you've been able to play with? What's your favorite toy?
I mean, the one that I didn't make up.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Something you didn't make up. What's
it's Master of the Universe.
Yeah, I knew. That had to be a blast.
So I remember that Tim was. It's the only time I've ever seen you kind of starstruck. Which is what we go through all the time whenever we talk to comic book creators. But when we had Don Glute on the show, you kind of fanboyed.
Dude, he fucking came up with all that shit. I mean, he didn't design the toys, but he came up with all their names. He gave Tila the name Tila because he liked the fucking elephant that Tarzan had. I mean, dude,
Castle Grayskull.
Yeah, named after his ex-wife.
Right.
I mean, yes, that was a huge deal to me. And, I try to do a thing where there's a certain level of fandom of which they don't understand the thing that they love is silly or it's for kids or whatever.
Yeah.
And it makes them evil, right? Like, so the people are like, you should
It's like, you should take He-Man seriously, even though the name is one of the dumbest combinations.
Hey.
I mean, there are those people like who who probably stormed the Capitol because they felt insulted about Green Lantern, right? I mean, and I hate that. I fucking hate that because it is for kids, and I'm sorry that that's true. And you can like it, but it was made for kids, and so the things are inherently supposed to be a certain kind of thing. And I originally, when working on Master Universe stuff, was like, I don't want to. I want to have a hobby, and I'll keep this as these toys I collect, and I can kind of see it from the outside, and I'll always enjoy what you make, and I'll never be angry, and it's totally fine. I'll always have my little stuff, but eventually, like, I couldn't resist the call, and
the siren song to write Masters of the Universe.
And I think, I don't think I'm that good at writing a lot of things, but I'm good at writing Master Universe. Like I know how to do it. I know everything there is to know. I won't break.
I know the guy with 3 faces. Was that Triface?
Wait, brother. There's many faces, 3 faces. There's Triclops with 3 eyes.
Yes. I'm sorry. I literally got Triclops. Yeah, I got them all.
So let me ask you this, Tim. I know, from my own experience as a child, having He-Man and all the toys, I mean, you told stories with them, right? So I'm sure you and your brother must have told a billion stories with the He-Man toys when you were kids.
Yeah.
Did any of that stuff make it into?
No.
The
thing is, when we were kids, it's weird because we treated I definitely, like, the process of coming up with a plot is so different from how we played as kids. Like, we made up shit, but like when we played Master Chief together, it was like there was my parents' room and my room and my brother's room, and each was a different planet full of guys, and they would have these massive wars, and everything would run into each other, and there was no fucking story there.
There was no like, hey, you know what? Before we met Orko, he killed somebody.
Yeah, right.
Like that.
There was no measurable plot. I did have like sort of thoughts, like when we'd sit down and draw, though, that is different. We would like sit down at the kitchen table and we would draw stories. And so we would draw He-Man stories. We would draw Thundercats. We draw He-Man meets Thundercats. We draw, whatever stuff. That shit.
The crossover that the world still needs.
Yeah, right. Well, we got He-Man versus Thundercats. But DC did it. It's awesome. It's by Rob David and Lug Golfin. It's a great book, actually. I recommend it. Freddie Williamson drew the shit out of it. But the stories that we would come up with drawing comics, that was something that I did pull from. Because, like, there was a story.
I knew it. I knew it was somewhere. I knew it.
Yes.
So it was definitely like accurate shit. It made its way into, there's some of the things that I had for Tila and I had for Skeletor. That came from shit that I drew as a kid. And in fact, Masters of the Multiverse, which was the book I wrote from DC before they licensed with the Dark Horse. Part of that shit was stuff I came up with when I was a kid because I had heard about, this anti-He-Man, like evil He-Man shit. So yeah, that's what made it in. But when we played with toys, it was just literally throwing guys at each other and, bombing Castle Grayskull and dropping people in moats and fucking. It was always like,
as it should be.
Yeah,
it was always the action scenes,
right? And it was always like it was more about like building shit for them, like making moats and like and like turning the blue carpet into the ocean, and it was more like that kind of thing. It was
and then destroying it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Tim, before we finish up here, definitely want to let people know about Money Shot, the new series coming out when?
April 26th, so 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks from now? Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
What else are you doing, man? We haven't talked in like a year and a half.
Yeah, I've got Masterverse, which comes out. Issue 3 just came out this week. Issue 4 comes out in a month, actually, obviously, and then Hexware issue 5 came out this week, so 6 comes out in a month. West of Sundown just finished up. Issue 10 came out this week. I'm doing the crossover event Unforgiven at Marvel, which is basically Marvel versus Vampire, sort of. Let's see. I just started DC Night Terrors, the new crossover thing. I'm doing Angel Breaker series with Aki Brights for that. Let's see, what else the fuck am I doing?
Jesus.
Gee, like Sal wasn't lying. You are the hardest working man in comics.
Local Man. I do Local Man. That comes out every month. I write and draw that with Tony Fleeks. I draw. I fucking draw again. I draw 5 or 6 pages an issue of that book. Except
I love the first. I haven't caught up on it yet, but I loved the first issue of Local Man. It was so fun.
I think issue 2 is better and 3 is better than that. So if you liked it, I think you will like.
I will get them for sure. I just haven't gotten there yet.
So that comes out. 2 just came out last week or 2 weeks ago, and then so 3 comes out in 2 weeks from now. That's from Image. That's a monthly series. But yes, I'm drawing again. I fucking draw. That should be a thing. People through. So yes, and if you don't know Local Man, it's a crime series about a guy who used to be in this sort of celebrity super team called Third Gen, and he gets kicked out and sent back to his hometown because he has nothing and he can't use his costume and he doesn't own his shield anymore, and so he has to investigate the murder of his archenemy, the Hodag, in rural central Wisconsin. So that's it's a serious book. People are like thought it would be goofy, and it's not. It's a real story. So
how do you keep all of this straight in your brain?
Oh, I don't. it's I have to, like, every Sunday night. Usually, I review my own shit because I forget what I fucking did.
That's amazing. Well, Tim, obviously with the busy schedule, want to thank you so much for carving out some time. It's always great to talk with you, man.
And if you haven't ever read Cherry as a comic collector and fan, if you're into the history of stuff, I think it's worth it just for. I mean, even if you're not inclined to pornography like myself, it's worth it for its place in history. And also the interesting way that it subverts expectations as it goes on.
It jerks off your brain too.
Do you? Wow! Wow! Put that on the back cover. A money shot. It jerks off your brain. I gotta send you. There's an artist that I follow on Instagram. I don't know her name. She has kind of a funky name, but I ran into her at a Comic-Con like 6 years ago, and she had a very Don DeCarlo kind of style. She did a lot of pinup stuff, but it was I mean very, very Don DeCarlo-ish, and to the point where, I mean, like, obviously, but I've paid attention to her work over the years, and like she's developed now her own style that's kind of still has that DeCarlo look, but it's not, it's her own sort of really good style. Maybe something
sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you because, like I said, maybe something for Money Shot. It might, even if it's just a pinup or something, or a cover. But I think it would work really well for.
That's also an interesting thing about Archie style is that it's basically developed by Don DeCarlo, and it's supposed to be this sort of all ages kid thing. But Don DeCarlo is a Playboy artist.
Yeah.
So like it's the other thing interesting about Cherry is it's a porn version of a thing that was a porn thing until it became this 50s, sort of
white bread,
right? Like, so that's an interesting bit of history as well. And it's so much, how sexy Archie stuff is when you look at some of the old stuff, and it's just shot. It's like, of course, this is a Playboy artist. I can see it right here. And
he did all the Playboy cartoons for decades, right? Like he was,
yeah. So it's awesome that, and that particular art style is so associated with one thing, but
wholesomeness.
Wholesomeness. Which, I mean, I have a collection of Don DeCarlo Playboy cartoons, and they're
not wholesome.
Not wholesome. Not at all.
Yeah, I think I have one of his books somewhere around. It's great stuff, but yeah, it's not wholesome.
No,
that's awesome. All right, anybody else got anything for Tim here?
Just love to talk to you again, man. It's always good.
Yeah,
always love talking with you, Tim. And
you want to get like a beer and talk like real humans in real life.
There you go.
Absolutely, would love to.
I'll come down from Wisconsin.
from
You know, I love tidings from Wisconsin. You know, I'm a fan of Wisconsin.
You know, Tim, I gotta say, I gotta sneak it in here. Wausau has one of the crown jewel curling clubs in the country.
I used to go to college. I used to go to college where that curling.
Yeah, it's an 8-sheeter. It's
Yeah.
It's an 8-sheeter.
it's it's a big fucking deal, man. It's a really nice curling club.
I remember, so I was going to college at that time, and
Mhm.
during the Olympics, the Winter Olympics that year, 1996, I think. I remember all these people coming from all over the world to go to that curling thing, and I was welding some shit in the art building right next to there. It's just like, you know, welding some shit together to make a fucking sculpture project or whatever. So there you go.
Yep, beautiful Wausau, Wisconsin.
It ain't the worst.
All right, so next week we are not having a Under the Influence. We're having trade talks. We're talking about J. Michael Straczynski and Gary Frank's Midnight Nation.
Oh shit, I love that book.
Right?
So underrated. That book is fucking great.
Right. It's if you want to join us, come on back.
Come back next week.
I love that book. I'm actually a huge supporter of that. That's one of the best things Straczynski ever did.
I agree. So we'll be talking about Midnight Nation, and then in 2 weeks we have Jamal Eigel on to talk about The Killing Joke.
Cheater. That's cheating. That's not a single issue.
Right to the fancy shit. That's
The fancy.
Tim gave us 2 other influential comics that we can always have you back on for. Which I would.
What else did I throw you? I don't remember.
No. Secret Assassin. Oh, come on.
Yeah. I had some great. I know. Oh, Scud Disposable.
Scud, yeah.
Disposable Assassin.
Yeah, Disposable Assassin.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, I could talk about that for days.
Yeah,
and me and Ryan Brown on to talk about that.
That's why you were like Cherry Comics or Scud, and then there was another one, and I want to get Ryan on, and I know he's going to pick Scud.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. We went out for drinks yesterday. We talked about Scud for like 20 goddamn.
Yeah, he's like a CrossFitter. It's like if he's going to talk about CrossFit, except it's Scud Disposable.
He's going to talk about Scud.
Yeah, he's gonna talk about it. All right, Tim. Thank you so much for visiting us. We will absolutely have you on again. It's always great to see you. Tell Norton hi. We haven't had him on yet, so we need to talk to Mike coming up. Have a great rest of your week and weekend. We will be back next week to talk about Midnight Nation. In the meantime,
in between time,
we'll be everywhere in
and
around
comics. Oh God, I can't hit.